Emily Schiffer, in her article For Deaf Runners Like Me, Inclusivity Requires More Than Lip Service, speaks of the complexity of running as a deaf person. Schiffer states that when she's on a run, she needs hearing people to look out for her since she cannot hear warning sounds like car horns or what is coming up behind her. When she began running in groups, however, she found that no one had ever run with a deaf person before, and they most definitely did not know sign language. This forced the group and Emily to learn how to communicate through a spoken English and ASL combo. Today I'll be discussing why American Sign Language should be offered in schools to create a means of communication between the deaf and hearing communities. There is an outstanding number of deaf and hard of hearing persons in the United States. However, the number of ASL users does not compare to this great number. In both hearing and non-hearing communities, there is a dire need for those who can sign to ease communication between the two communities. This is a result of lack of exposure to American Sign Language. I'll first talk more about the lack of ASL users in the United States. Then I will discuss how incorporating ASL in schools is the best way to increase exposure to ASL, which in turn will facilitate communication between both hearing and non-hearing communities. I will begin by explaining the lack of ASL users in the U.S. According to the Survey of Income Program Participation, nearly 10 million persons are hard of hearing and close to 1 million are functionally deaf. Rossi Mitchell estimates in his article How Many People Use ASL in the United States that only about 500,000 people in the U.S. use American Sign Language. This means that of 10 million hard of hearing or deaf Americans, only 1% use ASL, and a much smaller percentage of hearing Americans know ASL. Schiffer states that it wasn't until she was in college that she could thrive in her deafness. This thriving was due to the sources she found to help her learn ASL. Before then, Schiffer did not have the resources to learn ASL, leaving her unexposed and unable to communicate effectively. Now, after being informed on lack of signers in the U.S., I will share my thoughts on a solution to this problem. The biggest barrier between hearing and non-hearing communities is their inability to directly communicate. However, both communities could use a language that would be understood by both parties, sign language. This solution seems to be quite simple. Unfortunately, though, access and exposure to ASL is not as high as it ought to be. According to Diane D'Amico, in her article in the Press of Atlantic City, there are only about 20 public school districts in the state teaching ASL to hearing students. This is only 3% of public school districts in the state of New Jersey. If more districts offered ASL to students, exposure to sign would increase drastically. ASL classes in schools is not unrealistic. 11 out of the 50 U.S. states have some sort of foreign language requirement in order to graduate. Another 24 states have graduation requirements that can be fulfilled with foreign languages. If a great number of states already require the study of a foreign language, how much harder could it be to require American Sign Language classes or at least offer them? In conclusion, today I talked to you about how implementing American Sign Language in schools can help create a means of communication for the hearing and non-hearing communities. I first talked about the lack of ASL users in the U.S. Then I spoke to you about how incorporating ASL in school is one of the best ways to facilitate communication between these two communities. The lack of exposure to ASL today is unbelievable. There are nearly 10 million non-hearing persons in the U.S., and not enough of them know ASL, and if they do, there are not enough hearing ASL users. This is unacceptable considering there's a straightforward solution to the problem. Make ASL commonplace by starting in the schools. This is what you can do. Communicate with your school boards and district, with your governors and mayors. Speak to anyone who will listen and let them know that we need ASL in schools. We need to write petitions and be vocal for those who can't speak up for themselves. Finally, expose yourself and the ones around you to sign language. Exposure to ASL starts with you. It only takes a conversation, a class, a petition to spark a movement. Thank you.